Set the record straight, chapter 30. Sometimes it pays to take the time to set the record straight. When New York Times published a review of a book that included some juvenile remarks about me, I was inspired to write them a letter. The book review didn't merit a letter, but I enjoy writing when I can set the record straight or make a point. The letter was published by the New York Times and, as it turns out, was named Best Letter of the Year to New York Times Book Review by New York Magazine. It may have been a condescending letter, but so were the reviews. So were the reviewers' remarks. Why did I take the time to write it? Because it mattered and because I don't give up. In fact, here's a copy of the letter for your future reference. In case it ever happens to you, I hope it doesn't, but remember to do something about it, even if it does, you just might win a citation for your efforts in addition to setting things straight, creating a win-win for situations. Creating a win-win for situations yourself can happen even as a result of bad or negative knocks. That's how you turn problems and challenges into success. Here's a letter. It reads, Best Letter of the Year to the New York Times Book Review. Okay. August 2005 to the editor. I can remember when Tina Brown was in charge of New Yorker magazine and a writer named Mark Singer interviewed me. He was depressed. I was thinking, okay, expect the worst. Not only was Tina Brown dragging the New Yorker to a new low, this writer was drowning in his own misery, which could only put me in a skeptical mood regarding the outcome of their combined interest in me. Misery begets misery, and they were a perfect example of this. Jeff McGregor, the reviewer of character studies, encounters with the Curiously Obsessed, a collection of Mark Singer's New Yorker profiles, writes poorly. His paternally wait what? His paternally turn with naturisms sound like a junior high school yearbook entry. Maybe he and Mark Singer belong together. Some people cast shadows and other people choose to live in those shadows. I read John Updike. I've read Orlan Pamuk. Pamuk. I've read Philip Roth. When Mark Singer enters their league, maybe I'll read one of his books, but it will be a long time. He was not born with great writing ability. Until then, maybe he should concentrate on finding his own lonely component, and then try to develop himself into a world-class writer instead of having to write about remarkable people and who are clearly outside of his realm. I've been a best-selling author for close to 20 years. Whether you like it or not, facts are facts. The highly respected Joe Queenan of the New York Times Book Review mentioned in his article of March 20, 2005, Ghost in the Machine, that I had produced a steady stream of classics with stylistic seamlessness and that the voice of my books remained noticeably constant to the point of being astonishing an astonishing achievement. This was high praise coming from an accomplished writer, from losers like Jeff McGregor, whom I have never met, or Mark Singer. I do not do nearly as well, but I'll gladly take Joe Quinnan over Singer and McGregor over any day of the week. It's a simple thing called talent. I have no doubt Mr. Singer's and Mr. McGregor's books will do badly. They just don't have what it takes. Maybe someday they'll astonish us by writing something of consequence. Yeah, I completely butchered that letter, but it's a really interesting read. It's definitely um very thought provoking. Don't give up. Do give up on complainers. Chapter 31. I don't believe the customer is always right. Here's a good example. I read recently that Sprint Nextel has cut more than 1,000 customers for being too high maintenance. Apparently, these clients call customer service too often and make what the company says are unreasonable requests. While the average subscriber calls customer service less than once a month, these 1,200 subscribers getting released by the company call 40 to 50 times more frequently. All the excessive complaining has frustrated the management to the point that the business just isn't worth it anymore. Sprint says they've done what they can to try and resolve the issue, but because the complaints keep coming in, and obviously these customers will never be happy. So they are letting them take their business elsewhere. I know exactly how they feel. I've had customers I've taken great care of, and no matter what I do, they're never happy. So you just have to go about your business and forget about them. Don't keep catering to complainers. A complainer will always be a complainer. They're trouble, plain and simple. They're just not worth it. Be patient. You may have to wait 20 years for a deal to pay off. Chapter 32. What does feel like what does it feel like to work on something for 20 years? For one thing, it can make you realize that great things don't come easily. Another thing is that it will give you a sense of accomplishment that can't be denied by anyone, even your most vociferous detractors. I should know, I've had plenty of those. People have often asked me, what keeps you going? In this case, what kept you going on a single development project for 3 decades? There's a famous Broadway musical that became an Academy Award winning movie called West Side Story. It's considered a classic. The score, the lyrics, and the story are timeless. It also took 10 years of collaboration between four very gifted people to get it up and going. I used to think that when I was trying to get somewhere with the West Side rail yards in New York, which have now become Trump Place, then one day I realized I'd been working on it for close to 30 years with no collaborators trying to get this going with me. I was in it alone. I think I deserve a Tony Award or two for that. But the story itself could win an award without spinning any yarns or singing any tunes to make it interesting. It's the perfect illustration for the title of this book, Never Give Up. This saga began in 1974 when I secured the option to buy the West Side Rail Yards from Penn Central Railroad. The city wasn't doing great, and the West Side wasn't as cool as it is now by a long shot. But this was riverfront property, and I was getting a very low price. It was my first major deal in Manhattan. During the next 5 years, I was busy with my other projects, which included the Commodore Hyatt renovation, Trump Tower, and the Atlantic City. At the same time, government subsidies dropped for the sort of housing I was considering for the location. In addition, I had great opposition from the West Side community, which was notorious for their reluctance to change. It was a tough situation, and I was busy with other things, so I gave up my original option in 1979, and Penn Central sold the rail yard to someone else. The team they sold it to was smart, but they didn't have much experience in New York. You need a solid knowledge of rezoning, which is a complex fact of the real estate business in this city. They finally got the zoning they needed, but erred in giving too many unnecessary concessions to the city in addition to many other mistakes, and they were forced to sell out. This was a huge development, and they weren't prepared for what it entailed, nor did they know how to promote it. I wasn't surprised to receive a call in 1984 telling me they were interested in selling. I agreed to buy it for $100 million. That's about 1 million per acre for a waterfront property in Midtown Manhattan. If you consider the Coliseum site, now the Time Warner Building at Columbus Circle, which is not too far from the rail yards, is a very small in comparison, was sold for 500 million very shortly after I bought the rail yards. You can see that it was a tremendous deal. That was, of course, 1984. Now it's 2007. Trump Place, which is comprised of a 16 high-rise residential buildings overlooking the Hudson River, is almost finished, but not quite. It had been a ride, quite a ride. But let's get back to how it happened. I realized I'd have to make this project beneficial and attractive to the city in the hope they would give me the zoning I needed. What that would be, I didn't yet know, but by coincidence, shortly after I bought the rail yards, NBC announced they were looking to relocate. They'd been at Rockefeller Center for years, and they were considering to move to New Jersey, which would save them money due to lower taxes and lower real estate prices. My idea was to offer NBC enough space to comfortably relocate to the west side while still being able to build my residential project as planned. I then realized that the site was ideal for television and motion picture studios, regardless of whether NBC was interested. I decided to call this part of the project Television City. That would attract attention and hopefully generate some excitement. I would also plan to build the world's tallest building on the site and announced that to the press. You can imagine the interest that generated. Just as had happened before with Woolman Rink, Mayor Koch and his allies were against any and all of my ideas. People said I wasn't being reasonable, but the controversy I stirred up managed to keep this project in the news. I'm big on promotion because promotion works. It helps to get things going. It helps to get the public interested in what will ultimately benefit them. However, the city was stonewalling my project. Coke was still bruised from my success with Woman Rink, and he certainly didn't want to see me with any more victories. Let's just say those interim years between 1984 and 1996 were usurped by the ridiculous antics of the city. You've gotten a taste of that already with Woman Rink. However, this 12-year period is when my tenacity was given a true test. This was the largest development ever approved by New York City Planning Commission and the biggest project ever undertaken by the private sector in New York City. A couple of times I thought, is this really worth it? Then the challenge itself would keep me going. When I say to never give up, that applies to me big time. I used seemingly detrimental factors to my benefit. For example, in the early 1990s, things were not good in New York City, but that meant that it was easier to get the zoning I needed. A few years later, I started to build in a rising economic climate, which is the ideal situation. Of course, things started looking up. However, it was never easy. Patience is a word not normally associated with me, but you can see that, in fact, it's very much part of my being. Because I hung in there, we eventually got the approvals we needed and were finally able to break ground in 1996. Through the years, my plans for the site changed, and Trump Place evolved into a fantastic residential property that has greatly improved the west side. The 16 high rise buildings are each unique and very beautiful in their own way, and the community enhancing 25-acre Riverside Park offers bicycle paths, waterfront walking, picnic, and sporting areas, and a pier. It's become a thriving gathering place for the neighborhood, and the buildings sell out before they are finished. It's been a 20-year-old ordeal, but a tremendous feeling to see how it has finally worked out. I think everyone is happy about this one, except maybe for former Mayor Koch. If you visit New York City, be sure to visit the pier and look behind you at the magnificent stretch of buildings along the Hudson River. It's quite a sight. Remember that some things are worth waiting for. Plans can change, sometimes for good reason. Everything has a flip side. Be ready for both sides to surface. Be prepared to wait. Have you waited 20 years for something yet? No, if you're not, then you're a loser. Also, if not, then complaints will not be accepted. Keep working, keep waiting, and of course, never give up, says Coach Trump. Fred Trump's 4 step formula to getting things done. Chapter 33. I learned a lot from my father. I learned about competence and efficiency. One of the best pieces of advice he ever gave me was his favorite formula for success. I call it the 4 step formula: get in, get it done right, and get out. In looking back, I realize I also learned this by watching him in action. That's how he operated, and it worked. Some people say I'm blunt, that I'm brash, I'm no nonsense, but that's also true. To me, it's a compliment because that's how I get so much done. That doesn't mean that I'm not patient, because I am, but when it's time to get moving on something, the best thing to do is to get moving. I've seen people wait so long for their golden opportunity that by the time they get around to doing something, it's too late. Let's break down this formula. Number one, get in is shorthand for getting started. If you want to be part of the action, you can't watch from the sidelines. Give yourself a goal and focus on it. Write it down. There's a lot of information now that proves making lists, even if you are able to do it in your mind, which I am, is effective. In fact, 3 lists should be in your mind at all times. Your daily goals first, your year's goals second, and then your lifetime goals. Look at look at or think about these lists daily. It will help you focus tremendously. A lot of people don't realize that stress is directly related to focus. So if you learn to control your power of focus, you'll be on the way to conquering stress in your life. Get it done. Number two, sometimes that's easier said than done. Here's where you may have to confront obstacles, so expect them. Expect problems. There are they are there to bring you closer to getting it done. It's amazing how much this attitude will help you in life. Your attitude is something that will be that's to expected versus poor me. Look what's happening. Keep your focus on getting it done, and your problems will seem like nothing more than a part of the day, like sunrise and sunset. Get it done right. Number three. Here's where I can be and have been labeled difficult. I know what great is. I know what mediocre is. Mediocre and I do not get along. I have high standards for myself, and therefore I do not put up with less than the best. That's why the Trump brand is synonymous with the best. If you have a product or a brand or a business, you'd better have the same attitude or you're not playing hardball. This focus is how I made a name for myself. I have the ability to get things done and to get them done right. Very few people will argue with that fact whether they like me or not. I can deliver the goods and they know it. Rock solid is rock solid. Work toward that reputation for yourself. Number four, get out. This approach will clear your slate for all the new and exciting projects that are waiting to be done by you. This is another example of discipline focus. When a job is finished, it's your time to move on. I have people who will look after me in my developments, and there's no reason for me to spend my time doing what other people can do. My job is to find new projects for everyone to work on, figure out what your job is, and streamline your activities and mental energy to focus on that. Considering the scope of my business and the fact that I'm actively involved in a lot of them, I think you can recognize the fact that I employ this four-step formula on a daily basis, day in, day out. This is how I organize my thoughts and my days. It worked for my father and it works for me. Make it work for you. Let me repeat the four-step formula. Number one, get in. Number two, get it done. Number three, get it done right. Number four, get out. The turnaround always starts with creative positive thinking. Chapter 34. I was thinking about Norman Vincent Peale, so I mentioned him in a speech I gave where my point was the positive thinking really works. Dr. Peale wrote the classic book on this topic called The Power of Positive Thinking. I attended Dr. Peale's church in New York City and I heard him speak some years back. What I took away from his speaking is that positive thinking is creative thinking. You can't be positive unless you also make an effort to think creatively about your situation. Dr. Peale was a tremendous storyteller, and I also like to tell stories to illustrate a point. This chapter tells the story of how something that's a mess can turn out brilliantly if you are positive and creative in your approach. I was always interested in foreclosures and would spend my time in college reading the listings of federally financed housing projects in foreclosure. That's how I found Swifton Village in Cincinnati, Ohio. My father and I bought it together and it became my first big deal. I was still in college. Swifton Village was in big trouble. There were 800 vacant apartments out of 1,200. The developers had faltered and the government had foreclosed. It looked a mess. However, I saw it as an opportunity. Even the fact that there were no other bidders did not discourage me. That's often when you can get the best deals. My father and I put in a minimal bid for Swifton Village. The project had cost 12 million 2 years earlier and we paid less than 6 million. We got a mortgage for what we paid plus close to 100 grand, which we'd use to fix up the property a bit. This means we got this project without putting down any of our own money. It would also be possible to cover the mortgage from the rent proceeds. Our first big challenge was to find tenants who would pay rent. That doesn't sound like an outlandish request, but this complex had a reputation for rent runners. These tenants would rent a trailer, pile into it with their belongings in the middle of the night, and be gone. They had it down to an art form. I realized we'd have to hire someone for round the clock patrol, which we did. We also wanted to make some improvements because the place was pretty dilapidated. Considering the size of the complex, that would require 800 grand. Fortunately, to cover the cost, we were allowed to increase the rents immediately, something that was easier in Cincinnati than in New York. Some of the improvements we made included replacing the ugly aluminum front doors on the apartments with colonial white doors. We also put white shutters on all the windows. which considerably improves the aesthetics of a large mass of red brick buildings. We made sure the grounds were properly landscaped and maintained that the apartments were freshly painted and perfectly clean. The challenge was made impressive. The change we made was impressive. When we were finished, we ran a newspaper ad in Cincinnati. People came and were impressed. In less than a year, Swifton Village was 100% rented, and it looked fantastic. It was a beautiful place to live. The next crucial challenge when you have a complex of this size is to find a project manager. We went through at least 6 or 7 before we found a person suited for the job. I'll never forget this man. He wasn't politically correct, he was as incorrect and insulting as they come. He was the personification of a con man. As it turns out, he was a con man with a very colorful record of multiple swindles and cons to his credit. But he was a fantastic manager. He could work quickly and get things accomplished. The other managers were perhaps more honest, maybe more affable, but they were ineffective. Nowhere near as sharp. I knew I'd have to keep my eye on this guy, but at least things would get done. He also knew how to collect rent, which is not always an enviable job. That's another thing that made him suitable. This wasn't an easy situation from the get go, but it was a great lesson in human nature and looking positively and creatively at someone's qualifications. Outwardly, the guy looked and acted like a disaster, but he was the one who did the best job. He got Swifton Village running well enough so that I didn't have to be in Cincinnati very often. I knew he was probably ripping me off, but he kept the place well and people actually paid their rent. The project was a resounding success, and a few years later, when I was visiting the property, I ran into a tenant who had become a friend. He had survived a concentration camp in Poland, so I knew he had the street smarts and I respected his opinion. He told me I should get out, sell the place. It was successful and fully rented, so I asked him why. And he said it wasn't the property or the management, but the area was turning bad. I spent a couple days in Cincinnati to check this out for myself, and he was right. It was becoming a rough area surrounded by equally rough neighborhoods. There was an obvious shift occurring, and not in the right direction. I decided to put Swifton Village up for sale. Response was swift, and it wasn't long before I saw fruits of my first deal. We bought Swifton Village for 6 million and sold it a few years later for 12. That's a nice profit. The thing to remember is that I went into this crummy place and decided not only to see it as positively, but also creatively. And look at the results of that attitude. Cultivate it in yourself. Creative, positive thinking can be a powerful source of success. Give, get the most from every day. Chapter 35. When I was starting out in Manhattan, I had to be courageous because I was in new territory. I did my homework and studied and watched what was going on, but I was paving the way my own way and I hoped to appear confident, or I knew I'd never make it. Every day mattered. Every day was important. This was the big time and I knew it. I've never lost that edge. I still feel the same way every day. And I think that's one reason I've managed to achieve as much as I have. Confidence can get you confidence can get you where you want to go. It's so much easier to achieve when you feel good about yourself, your abilities and your talents. That's why I'm emphasizing confidence as a way to get the most from every day. You see, it's absolutely essential. So never let anyone undermine your self, including you. Even if you haven't encountered great success yet, there is no reason you can't bluff a little and act like you have. Confidence is a magnet in the best sense of the word. It will draw people to you and make your daily life and theirs a lot more pleasant. Take the pains required to become what you want to become, or you might end up becoming something you'd rather not be, a loser. It's like the hub versus rim theory. Do you want to be the hub or the rim? Being the rim means you're more centered, more central. Being on the rim means being away from the action or the driving force. When I emphasize the importance of focus, that is one way of visualizing it. Focus on the center, on what's really important in your life. That can make the difference between your being the hub or the rim. Business is full of complexities. That's what makes it so interesting. Anyone who thinks it's boring hasn't given it much thought. Business can be an art, and as an art, it is evolving and mysterious in its own right. When I wrote The Art of the Deal, I was really just illustrating this aspect of business, and I haven't changed my mind about it. Like an artist, I give my utmost energy every day to what I am doing. I am not pretending in any sense of the word. If you really want to succeed, you'll have to go for it every day like I do. The big time isn't for slackers. Keep up your mental stamina and remain curious. Bored people equally unintelligent people in my mind. Hopefully, since you're reading this, that unfortunate group won't ever include you. It better not. I don't like dropouts either. Get with and keep up with the program. I mean, every single day. I'm not really a tough guy, but I am when it comes to education and using your brain. Use your fucking brain. Ignorance is more expensive than education, and considering what's available these days, Trump University, for example, very few people can make a strong case for ignorance. It was Thoreau who wrote, "If you have built a castle in the air, your work needs to be lost." Sorry, he wrote, "If you have built castles in the air, your work need not be lost. That is where they should be. Now put the foundations under them." I couldn't have said it better. Get your visions, get focused, and then do the work starting today. Take a lesson from Muhammad Ali and me. Know when to brag. Chapter 36. I remember when Muhammad Ali was claiming that he was the greatest. He didn't quibble. He stated in absolute terms that he was the greatest. Fortunately, he proved that he was, or he might have gone down as someone who was delusional. It's interesting to note now that those days are history, that he set himself up for a situation that demanded that he prove himself, and he did prove himself. I think he set the bar high for himself on purpose. I know I do. I can often be heard saying that my next project is going to be huge and that it will be a tremendous success. Why? First, I have the confidence that it will be. Second, I know I have to live up to my own expectations. When you announce something publicly for the world to hear, you don't You'd better be right, or the day of reckoning won't be sweet. I don't have to worry about that so much anymore, but my standards are such that I give everything the same amount of effort as if it was my first big deal. Plus, announcing a new project always gets my adrenaline flowing. These public announcements aren't bragging, I simply state the facts. The fact is, my buildings are the best. That's why they sell out. Very often, before they're even built, Trump buildings get higher prices per square foot because they aren't just a brand name, but a luxury brand name. People know what they're getting. The buildings are in demand. Why should I have false modesty when it's false? The same goes for you. If you have something to be proud of and you can back up your claims, then go for it. Let people know. There is no reason to be coy about your great accomplishments. Marketing today requires that we grab customers' attention. It can make or break a business, and I do most of my own public relations because I know how to advertise my own brand. If you have a product or service, learn how to do the same. It will save you time and money. If you don't believe in your product and can't talk it up, who will? When people say that it's not my style, I can understand up to a certain point, but my initial reaction is that maybe they're just not too confident about the quality of their work. I had a young guy come in who had a remarkable background, but he was so self efficating that I started to believe his attitude more than his accomplishments. I ended up not hiring him because of the dampening effect of his attitude. If he had been a bit more upbeat, I would have been more apt to believe in him, but note what I said. I believed in him, but I didn't believe in him. His attitude overshadowed his qualifications. I don't need to hear someone bragging to be impressed, but someone who is obliterating his own chances seems like a loser to me. Loser. I don't want him on my team. When you go out for interviews, keep that in mind. There's a fine line you have to draw. You may be interviewing with someone who is low key. That's good. Keep that in mind. Most people will be able to recognize substance when they see it, but chemistry can't be ruled out either. The younger man I mentioned earlier will be a good fit somewhere else. I have no doubt about it. Remember that sometimes it's just a matter of being on the same wavelength. That old but true fact of personal chemistry, it's so unspoken. It's an unspoken dynamic that even noise or substance can't overrule. It's there or it's not. How would I look with a shaved head? Chapter 37. It became clear to me that wrestling is a very big deal these days, but just as I never thought I'd host Saturday Night Live, I never thought I'd get into the ring and take a challenge from Vince McMahon of WrestleMania. But I did. I guess one thing to remember is to never say never. I never think never. I also never thought I'd agree to have my head shaved if I lost the bet, but I did. Fortunately, I didn't lose, so my famous hair is still there and still famous. Did I have any doubts about winning? I sure did. The challenge was to remain confident and believe I would win. More than 81,000 people turned out to see what would happen. This was a new arena for me to begin with, wrestling. I was into baseball when I was in college and I knew a lot about it. I was hardly an expert at wrestling, which translates to I had to learn. I like to know what I'm doing, and Vince and I would be picking wrestlers to represent us in the ring. After much research and consideration, I chose Bobby Lashley, and Vince chose Umaga. Both top wrestlers. We had a press conference in Trump Tower, and a few days before the match, and during the conference, things got a little rough. Vince was taunting me, so I belted him. And the next thing we knew, Vince was on the floor. My bodyguard jumped out and our wrestlers went on the alert, but we saved the real fighting for the ring. Vince and I hadn't been friends before, but this friendly competition was becoming something else. The wrestling event seemed to set records and was featured in New York Times in a major article. This was big time, and the buzz ran the gamut from diehard fans who showed up in person to millions watching pay per view out of curiosity. What was Donald Trump doing now? What would he really risk getting his head shaved? I have to admit, there were a few moments when I asked myself the same questions. What was I doing? Was I doing it for the right reasons? Would the risk be worth it? I stood a very good chance of having my head shaved in public with millions of people watching, some no doubt gleefully. When I realized I liked the challenge, I didn't have to get into the ring, but it was still a match. The Battle of the Billionaires is how it was billed. In fact, Vince McMahon is an amazing guy and had been a successful businessman because he's an expert in wrestling. I had a few doubts about my ability to choose the right wrestler who would help me and see this through triumphantly. As the buzz increased, I knew there was no turning back. I'd either win or lose. It became that simple. I liked the adrenaline rush that this caused. It was exciting, and I realized I was having a great time. You've got to love what you're doing. As you've heard me say many times before, there was no doubt that I was loving it. Winning was the icing on top. Not having my head shaved was pretty nice too, which shows that it's worth it to take some risks sometimes. This is one of the biggest public chances and challenges I've ever taken. Was it worth it? Absolutely. I recommend you take a few for yourself. Life's not for the timid. Life's about never giving up, so get in the ring. When you're attacked, bite back. Chapter 38. When you've spent 40 years building a brand that is known worldwide, and then someone publishes a book that denounces your worth and damages your image and reputation in a scathing way, it becomes a serious issue. There's a writer with the New York Times named Tim O'Brien who had written some very negative articles about me. I didn't like him, and I didn't respect him as a writer because his facts were so incorrect and his articles were so viciously negative. Then I'd heard he was doing a book about me, and I was told he would write it with or without my cooperation, so it seemed in my best interests to work with him so his facts would be correct. I already knew he was bad news, but I was very cordial and open with him, giving him interviews and having him travel with me on my jet so I could give him the time he needed. I extended every courtesy to him, especially that of time. Then his book, Trump Nation, came out, and I realized there's a difference between news and evil. This guy was despicable. His intent was defamation. I'm not sure he was writing I'm not sure what he was writing about because what he wrote is so far from the truth. But I do know what he was writing for: attention and money. This isn't the proper way to do that. He had outright lies in his book, and he intended to damage me personally and my businesses. His reporting was reprehensible, as a ri- and as a writer, he's not very talented. I decided not to look the other way and to toss it off as jealousy, malice, or greed. Instead, I sued him and the publisher for a lot of money. The writer got the attention he was obviously looking for, but this publisher got something they weren't looking for. They obviously didn't know they were dealing with a guy who would eventually write Never Give Up and actually mean it. The publisher's conduct was not much better than O'Brien's, and they will have to hear the consequences. There are all types in this world. I've known some terrific writers and journalists who are honest and dedicated in their profession. Even though this guy wrote badly about me in the past as a New York Times reporter, I like to give people the benefit of the doubt, or at least a chance. In this case, I was giving him a second chance. In fact, more than the second chance, considering the negative articles he'd already written about me. So take this as a warning. They are going to pay a big price. For example, this writer purposely and knowingly understated my net worth by billions of dollars. He insisted I was worth a couple $100 million at most. Even Forbes acknowledges I'm worth much more, 2.7 billion being their conservative valuation. This writer had access to all the facts but chose to ignore them. Instead of relying on those facts, he claimed that he was relying on anonymous sources to misinterpret my business. So, what I did was invite Forbes into investigate to go over everything, which they did meticulously. And they confirmed what they had originally found, that I was worth conservatively 2.7 billion. They published their findings all this time and effort to put out by the Forbes team, and my team was a direct result of Trump Nation's deliberate and reporting errors designed to damage my reputation and businesses. As of September 2007, Forbes confirmed my worth at 3 billion. That number is much less than my actual net worth, but they were being conservative. By the way of comparison, a very respected journalist and writer, Robert Slater, wrote a book about me, No Such Thing as Overexposure, that turned out wonderfully for everyone. I had extended to Bob actually less hospitality than I had to Tim O'Brien, but because Bob is a writer of integrity, the end result was terrific. Bob has great credentials, and having reported on both for the Time and Newsweek for many years, he is one of the world's leading business biographers. He is also seems to understand that getting the facts right is a part of journalism's job. In any event, I told the publisher I had no intent on settling without a large payment and a full apology. I do not mind paying large legal fees as long as the end result will be the truth, which sometimes they avoid. Either way, many people would say, why bother? I say, why give up? I do not back down. I don't need this money from winning the case. I need to set the record straight and maybe make it harder for others to disrepute writers and make it harder for other disreputable writers to knock people for the fun and profit of it. I told them it was a court case that I am truly looking forward to because that, my dear friends, is the truth.